Up here on this hill, on this Wurrijdal country, my name's Jennifer Newman, I'm Wiradjuri, I'm far from home, and I'm here on Wurrijdal country where I've been living since 2006. Up here on top of the hill and thinking about down the bottom of the hill there's a river. Born on a river out at Narromine. Now I live on a river here. It's good for my heart, it's good for my feet. And I'm happy to be here on Wurrijdal country and to think about Wurrijdal who've been here before us. Think about that Wurrijdal person, Wurrijdjal Bennelong, on whose country we're sitting and whose footsteps we're walking. And that's exciting and beautiful and excellent to be able to think about walking in those footsteps of history, following those tracks and doing good work to care for country. I'm also here in great company this evening, people who bring beautiful hearts and minds, connections to the river, here on Wurrijdal country. So I want to say, hey Wurrijdal country, have a look at us. Just have a look at us here, coming to think and talk about the river here tonight. It's a beautiful thing to think about. Just this morning there was a little bit of rain, little tiny pitty-patty bit of rain, there's some more coming. And I love to think about that rain when it just falls gently on my head. That rain this morning, you know, it's connected to that rain that's been falling down up in Central Australia. Have you seen the spectacular footage of the cascades on Uluru at the moment? So it's not going to cascade down Uluru and then flow out here into the Cooks River. I know that. But it is going to cascade down Uluru, and some of it's going to seep down into that great artesian basin and fill the underground water systems. That's pretty amazing. So it will reach out through the underground water systems over here to where we are. But that connection between the land and the sky and the clouds is what's bringing that rain down onto us here, and we're going to see some more rain in a few days as that system builds up and moves across the top of Australia and heads down towards us here in the southeast. And that rain's going to fall, and I love to think about that rain falling because it falls down into the river, it falls down and flows through the catchment. And the little streams become creeks, and the little creeks flow into the rivers, and then that river flows off out there into the ocean. All of that beautiful flow, connecting us right across the country and connecting us with water here. And we're like raindrops. We've all tumbled down here on the earth. Somehow, wherever we came from, we've all tumbled down here on the earth, and we've formed those human catchments and flows across country. So just have a look at us, Wurrijdal country. Here we are. We're like the beautiful river of people coming to think about country tonight and coming to pay our respects and coming to walk together in unity with good minds and good hearts to care for country. It's a pleasure to acknowledge country in such fine company. So that's a good start. And here we are, a beautiful panel, a beautiful audience, and an excellent topic tonight. I wanted to just hark back for a minute, just to set the scene. I just wanted to hark back to Wurrijdal Festival's past, because our topic tonight, thinking about river health and human health and how we look after each other's health, reminded me of a poem that was part of the Rhythms of the River Poetry Slam out at Bankstown Arts Centre in 2022. It's not my poem, but it's a poem by Ying Chin, who's gifted these beautiful words and images and this important message to us. So I thought we could start with a poem. This is called What Pollutes Our Minds. And Ying Chin writes this: in the season of spawning, the fish send their seed out to the sea. They are words seeking sentences. Their language, one the river knows all too well. A longing for what they leave behind and are yet to find. A sign tells me that fish caught in this river should not be eaten due to high levels of pollutants. That I should release my catch. But I do not want to let go of the stories I have found in these waters. Stories that will be easier not to swallow, but I savour the taste, salty like mangrove, sweet stench of sewage that subsumes my senses yet does not deter. Two ducks basking in dusk's parting glow. Another sign tells me that we belong to the river and it belongs to us. These are the words of children marking an outdoor classroom. And I learned, dear river, that we constricted your throat to make room for an airport, removed birds from your vocabulary, scheduled arrivals and departures, forgetting that we cannot control, forgetting that pollution, like trauma, is inherited, an oil spill across the mind. We parted your lips, not for prayer, but for plastic, which you held in the way you hold everything. And I think about how to be held by water is to be held by history. Every drop of former life, ocean, river, lake, lamenting not loss, but limitless possibility. In the season of spawning, we send our stories out to the sea, unrust our tongues to speak your language, and wonder if we can forgive ourselves for what pollutes our minds. All of that applause, I hope, is going to Ying Chin, and that she has that feeling that someone must be speaking her words tonight. And you can find her on Instagram at The Harp Poet. So thank you, Ying Chin, for those words that I think open up what we're talking about this evening. Now, here we are, a beautiful panel of four, and I think each of us should introduce ourselves. I've already had my go, and so I'll pass to the left and ask Kiran.
Thanks, Jane. Beautiful acknowledgement as well. I can feel the flourishing possibility with all its contradictions coming through. And I want to pay my own acknowledgements to Wangal ancestors and elders. I'm from nearby Marrickville, just near the, right in the centre of Ballinaming, near the golf course. And I'm here representing Regen Sydney, which is an organisation that's been brewing over the last 3 years, trying to see how we might be able to build a regenerative economy in Sydney. And starting off first with donut economics, which we're seeing as a really powerful tool to get all our diverse communities and stakeholders, businesses, organisations into the safe and just space of the donut, which I'll explain a bit more about the donut and what regenerative economics means as we go on. And ultimately, it's about, part of it is, I suppose, First Nations people have been waiting for the rest of us to catch up about how we do business, do economics and govern ourselves in a way that actually aligns with caring for country. So that's Regen Sydney, I suppose, that's our big goal. And so we've got a couple of projects that we're working on at the moment, and I'll speak a bit more about that as we go.
Thanks, Kiran.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thanks. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for coming. It's so lovely. I counted. There's 21 activists sitting down, 4 of us panel members, and 3 helpers. So it looks like we have an army of 28 that's ready to go today. So thanks for joining us. So I'm Dr. Megan Sharkey. I am a co-founder of Better Streets, which was my PhD in London, where I helped over a number of years accelerate, better street changes across the city. And then help to bring that to Australia and to Sydney. And really, Better Streets is exactly what it says. It is a coalition of different groups who want better streets. And it was really less about an individual identity, but actually we have hundreds of coalition groups, hundreds of members, And it was really going, we're all talking about the same thing, like Regen, our Aboriginal groups, our friends at Cook's Alliance, and going, actually, why don't we work together? And so it was pulling those groups together to say, look, we all want the same thing. We might have differences of how we get there, but at its top, we want better streets. And when we need to pull together. And we're founded really on two principles. One is sharing is caring. Because we share. We need to share resources. We need to share activists. We need to show that as a community, this is what we want. And the second is that we always stay positive, because street battles are the things we get involved in, can be quite negative, but actually the positivity of why we want our street to be better is because we want our places to be better. We want the ground we walk on to be better. What you said, it's polluted, but it's still mine. And we want the things that we have to not be polluted. We don't want to let it go and just move somewhere else. We want to unpollute them. And so that's what Better Streets was founded for. And we're working now across Australia, growing because of the sharing is caring. But really, that's what it's about, is it's pulling together and showing that there is community support. And we actually don't need to wait for government. We don't need to wait for businesses. By actually connecting with the 28 activists we have in the room, we can actually make that change to better our streets today for our kids and our kids' kids, and for everyone else who is sharing that space with us. So, yeah, thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm Andrew Thomas and I'm the Executive Officer for the Cooks River Alliance, which sounds really fancy. But the Cooks River Alliance is... Does everyone know what the Cooks River Alliance is? Does anyone not know what the Cooks River Alliance is? Because I'll explain it really quickly. It's actually... There's me, I'm the Executive Officer. Over here we've got Jason, he's our Senior Community Engagement Officer. Over here we've got Claire, who's our Senior Catchment Officer, and her primary task at the moment is looking at the coastal management program for the Cooks River. And if you've got any questions about what that is, you can ask Claire when this is done. But we're currently a team of 3. We're about to hire a new person who's going to look at litter prevention from a catchment scale so that we can work with councils and coordinate, yay, which is great. And that's being actually fully funded by the EPA. We applied for the grant and, God love the New South Wales government. They're starting to pick up, they're starting to get there slowly but surely. And rather than fund 50% of some random project, they're actually funding people and professionals to do the job, so that we can work with the community and other councils to get things done in the long term. Really excited too, we're actually hired someone, they're starting on Tuesday, but the other position that has been vacant for some time is the Aboriginal Land Care Coordinator, and they're coming on. We're actually advertising that position now, so if you want to know more about that position or think there's someone who might want to apply, it's an Aboriginal identified position, let us know here or go on our website and email us through info@cooksriver, and it's on there, you'll be able to find it. And that's currently being advertised. And why I'm talking about that particularly is that's not the Cook River Alliance. This team that we're in is the secretariat for the team for the Cooks River Alliance. The Cooks River Alliance is actually the 4 councils and Sydney Water. So you've got Bayside Council, Inner West, Canterbury Bankstown, Stratfield Council, and now Sydney Water. They've been with us for about 4 years. Before, the Alliance itself has been around since 2011, so it used to be 8 councils, but they merged into 4. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is that there is no legislative requirement for these for councils and Sydney Water to come together. And you've got to give credit where credit's due. They come together and they're paying this team and helping us in providing resources and working together so that we can make the river, to revitalise the river in a manner that not only helps the environment, but also people. Because when I first came to the Alliance, I spent a lot of time with the then Aboriginal Land Care Coordinator, who was Kiran Kashyap. Some of you may know who that is. And I asked him, I spent a lot of time with him, what do you think our new strategic plan should be based on? And he articulated this concept of place and people. And it's similar to sort of the caring for country philosophy, which is classic Indigenous philosophies. that recognise that there is no separation between place or between the environment and people. If you don't look after the environment, you make it sick, you make people sick. And what's really interesting, there's been a lot of scholarship over particularly the last 20 years. And there's some research being done in Wollongong at the Population and Wellbeing Research Centre, or Power Lab, it's actually a lab, and there are others across the world. And there's a growing and massive amount of scholarship that shows that they're quite right. That if you, for example, if you put people who are sick in a hospital and one person's looking at a brick wall or just a cement wall, the other was looking at a park, you can actually measure the difference in recovery rate, equalising for everything else. So if you build urban development that is awful and not inhumane, it's just bricks and mortar, then you're going to make people physically sick and also impact on their mental health. And the science is in. The philosophies that the Aboriginal people talk about, that goes back thousands of years, is correct. And that's what we based our current operational strategy on, is the idea of place and people, and that you cannot help one without helping the other. So that's the basis of how we operate at the moment.
Thanks, Andrew. So we find ourselves already at this moment of thinking about caring for country as a philosophy, and that's country with a big capital C. Country is not just the earth, but country is the river, it's the water, it's the earth, it's the trees and the grass, and the insects and the birds and the fish and all the critters, all our non-human neighbours. And it's humans. Humans are part of country. So people need country for nourishment and shelter and growth and home, but country needs people as well. Country needs people to do things, to help it along. Kiran, how would you describe your connection to country?
I would say that, as you're just saying, country needs us. I'm getting this statement from Tyson Yunkaporta, who's written Sand Talk. Maybe some of you have read that. And he says, land without people is sick land. And I do think definitely in a lot of Western ideas of restoring landscapes, it's framed in this way of let's conserve it or rehabilitate it without humans. And so I think actually finding a way to place human activity, whether that's thinking about individuals or the systems and structures in place in society, to actually fundamentally reconcile with that difference. Because I think the system we're living right now is underpinned by a human and nature separation, as I'm sure many of you are aware. So I think in trying to reconcile that difference, that's actually the transition we're in the middle of. And I think we can get distracted by focusing on just carbon emissions or just issues of inequality, when actually all of these things are interconnected in such profound systemic ways. And I think that whilst we do bring in reductive approaches to hone in and address issues at the granular ground level, we also need to grow our capacity to think systemically and holistically across sectors and silos.
Is this how donut economics helps us?
Yeah, so it's one tool, and I think it's good to remember that it's been developed by Kate Raworth over in the UK. Originally, she came out with her book in 2017, and so it is a Northern European model. And so we're in a settler colonial country which has a completely different history to the context in which she's written this book. So I think she's actually acknowledged this as well. And so I think the call to action with the donut is actually to see how it can be adapted in place and to be able to take the framework, which in its most basic explanation is in the shape of a donut, where you have an ecological ceiling on the outside and then social foundations on the inside, and we want to get into the juicy middle bit, or the tasty doughy bit, which is the kind of safe and just space for all life. Originally, she had phrased it as for humanity. I think there's actually, ways that we've taken at Regen Sydney through, over the last 3 years, we've did a big body of research over the last year or two, adapting the donut, and we've come out with a first sketch of what a Sydney donut could be, what kind of social and ecological dimensions are relevant to our context and actually adapted to our history through a participatory process. We've got, you might have seen some cards over there to the side, and beautiful illustrations to kind of take this donut as it's the first step as a visionary compass to align our collective ambition. And so then people who are working across, for example, all of the diverse stakeholders that are working towards ecological restoration in the Cook's catchment can take something like that and adapt it themselves and work towards, have a shared compass, so that then they're actually working towards the same mission as to what they would like to see in this catchment. So first and foremost, it can act as a compass, and then a way for people to ground their collaborations in a shared understanding of what they're working towards.
Thank you. Megan, better streets are really at a base level are just so essential to better connectivity, but thinking about relationships with better streets, how does that uplift people and bring them into greater connection to country?
Well, firstly, I think it helps to solve one of the things you just mentioned. How do you connect across silos? Because each silo they want to make something better. They want to improve, a regenerative area. And so at its foundation, it's going, well, imagine in this room we were 28 different groups, right? And each of those 28 different groups are 28 different parts of this country. Now, they all have very strong similarities, right? They all walk in the same place. They all have kids. They all, they each want something that is saying the same thing in a slightly different language, right? And it's going, well, actually, there are 28 of us. We all agree. We're saying the same thing in a different language. We can do it together, right? Because then it uplifts it, and it's no longer a fringe group. It's no longer this group versus that group. It's going, actually, we agree on this one thing, and let's start there. Don't complicate it. So I think at its base is, Better Streets is taking that principle of, you might have multiple different countries and places, and each one might be unique. I'm not going to tell you what makes your street better. I'm not going to tell you what to do on that street, right? But I'm going to help you improve it, and we're going to connect together to do that. And then also the other thing I think, and this cannot be underestimated, so I'm someone who's moved around from a toddler in so many places. I counted the other day, I'm 38 and I've lived in 36 houses. And so countries and cities, I've had a very nomadic life from a very young age. But then something I always think about is the one thing I can do that you can't take, at the moment isn't taken away, is I get to walk. And when I first moved to Australia, I read a book about your song lines and this idea of walking. And when we started Better Streets in the UK, myself and this other lady, we just go, I just want to be able to walk with my kids somewhere. We should not have to fight to walk, right? And I was thinking in Better Streets at a fundamental level, and I think when you think about, what's your connectivity, well, pretty much it's the first thing we do as humans. Right? The first milestone is you get to walk. You get to walk to your friends, you get to walk to your neighbors, you get to walk somewhere else and ask, can I go there? And Better Streets is taking that everyone should have that right? No matter how you choose to walk or where you choose to walk, it shouldn't be at the detriment to your safety. It shouldn't be at the detriment to your person or well-being. And however you choose to walk or strut or, want to do that, everyone should get to do that. The way we do that is through the better streets and, the 28 plus that we have here. Oh, sorry, 29. Someone walked in late. I am keeping count. But I do think it's those fundamentals that every time each one of us says something, we're going back to really basic things that we've known for thousands and thousands of years that are literally part of our evolution. They are part of who we are, and we take that into the next one. When did you walk? How did you walk? Who did you walk with? And I think that's where Better Streets is, and that goes back to the root of what we want to do and how we want to bring people with us without taking over what makes them them, right? It's about building them up together.
Thank you, Megan. How do you deliver that message, Andrew?
Oh, yeah, okay. I was just going to, before I answer that question, I was just going to, a little anecdote, if you like. A couple of years ago when I was working at Blacktown Council, the ABC on their national website page was lauding this study that was done by Western Sydney University, and, great that Western Sydney University did it, and they were right to point it out. But it turns out that if you put, you've got playgrounds out in Western Sydney and they're really hot, it turns out that if you put trees in them, they're cooler. Yeah, it's called shade. And it's just interesting that everybody thought that this was an amazing discovery. And you've got to ask yourself, what the hell went wrong? And this is there's a word in social science, it's called epistemology. It sounds really fancy, but it has really important meaning. And it means questioning what you believe is true and what you accept as reality. And we got to the point, because we'd lived, and only for, we're not only talking a few hundred years at most, for most people, living in a certain way that we forgot that you could cool down an area just by simply, a tree provides shade and a couple of other things. But I just wanted to point that out. It's not just about engineering, it's not just about science, but it's the social science. I'm a bit biased. My last qualification was in social science. If we don't if we don't use our imaginations and accept the status quo, we may be doing ourselves harm. In fact, we are. And when it comes to the river and the message, I guess, is the river itself can be a message. So that's what Wurrijdal Festival is all about. It's talking about, it's sort of tapping into Indigenous philosophies of place and people and caring for country, but we're getting people down on the river, not necessarily to talk about those things specifically, but to make some sort of connection with them. We're hoping to grow the Wurrijdal Festival over the coming years so that people might visit it as part of the Wurrijdal Festival. It could be anything from, old cars, but they went there as kids and they saw the river and they made a connection with it. So that's how we use the river to communicate itself, so that they see that as part of them. Whereas, it's kind of crazy. The irony of the whole thing, and I think I'm right about this, I'm not a local, I've only been doing this role for a couple of years, but back in the 40s, I think it was, they had the Cooks River Improvement Act. And their idea of improvement was taking a perfectly good river and covering it in cement. I mean, who does that? But they also did that in Los Angeles and all over the world. South Korea was an example that Jason pointed out to me recently. South Korea literally built a highway over it. And then someone turned around, a few people probably went, well, this is a bit stupid. And they tore it down and they revitalised the river. And we would like to see the same thing with the Cooks River. And that's another way of messaging, is to demonstrate that, if you're going to change what you believe is, reality, then maybe look to other places to say, well, actually, it is possible and it's been done. So that's another way of messaging. And the other way of messaging is like this, and through the community. The Cooks River Alliance is 100% relying on community support to make sure that the politicians continue to fund it. And that requires groups like the Cooks River Valley Association, Wallai Creek, the Mud Crabs, and all of them to occasionally remind the councillors that they actually value the alliance and stuff like that, and vice versa. So one of our four focus areas is advocacy, where I wasn't sure if I was going to get away with it, but it got endorsed. That we actually proactively help community groups advocate which is sort of interesting for local councils and state government because they're somewhat scared of doing that. But yeah, that's another way of messaging. There are a whole different ways.
May I add to that? So when you say advocate, something we talk about in Better Streets is stories is better than data. And your question earlier, stories are better than data. And what you said, when you say advocate, and like, well, we had trees, and we're like, oh, this is amazing. And over time, we've lost that. Because, while people like reading books and they like seeing data, what they respond to is someone telling them a story. And someone telling them a story who they respect and who they value. And that might be a neighbor, that might be an elder, that might be, someone else they've resonated with, right? And so we go, actually, it's the stories that between each other help to grow, and it's almost like the advent of social media now. We are reverting back to our story, our oral story roots, right? Because now it's a visual story and it's an oral story. And so when we think about that and the advocacy, yes, data might be, amazing, but data doesn't sell someone by and large, right? But stories do. The personal story of what it means to have a difficulty walking, or what it means, I won't repeat it, but the story I was telling you earlier where, someone's, it's the stories that matter, because then people remember them. And then they say them over and over again. So we do actually with Better Streets, it's the stories that matter. When you're advocating, it's the personal stories and the stories about places that matter more than the data behind it. Because every piece of data, every number, has a personal story behind it. It has some connection. And you said you didn't have a local place, but I would disagree. You do have a local place. Yeah. You're just visiting, you're helping another local place.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have a job in your local place, Like today, I'm here helping, Canterbury Bankstown local place, even though mine is currently somewhere else as long as the other many places. So I do think that, we are reverting back to those oral stories and the personal stories because they matter more than data on a sheet, right? And your donut, they matter more. Like the donut is about the extremes, right? It's hard to put it in the donut, but we get extreme poverty and extreme wealth through those stories. And when we hear those stories, we go, that's wrong, right? And it's not a number on a page, it's something we feel about someone else. And that feeling helps us to go, actually, we should do it differently.
Can I add to that as well? I suppose there's this question around, in the stories and advocating, where clearly we're all humans, and who's kind of advocating on behalf of the river and the non-humans and the wetlands and the mangroves and the whole catchment as a whole at those different scales. And so there's this question around representing non-human perspectives. And there's so many ways you could do that. It depends on what context you're doing it in. You can do that in art. But of course, I think with the Regen Sydney perspective, our focus is on shifting structures through on-the-ground neighbourhood scale engagement. And there's a great example from the private sector. There's a couple organisations, Coalition of Everyone and Faith in Nature, who are now helping other organisations actually have put nature on their board of directors. So then you have directly this voice in the board of directors who's written into the Constitution, and your organisation is now being guided by that voice in all its operations. And so, there's a question here. Imagine if every single organisation in the Cooks River catchment had the Cooks River as a member on the board of directors. Wouldn't that change the directionality of each of those organisations completely? And then, of course, that's in the private sector, potentially also for public enterprise. But then if you come back to community and citizen engagement, there's a huge role to be played in participatory governance, because what we understand as governance at the moment is passive consumers let the three levels of government do everything on our behalf. And that's great, especially local council is very engaged with community. But I think when it comes to decision making in a more participatory way, citizens firstly need to get more involved. Not that they don't want to, but the mechanisms for that don't exist at the moment. And with that, of course, non-human voices need to be brought into those forums as well.
It's amazing, isn't it? There are rivers in the world that have been personified and been afforded legal status. Is that on the cards for the Cooks River, Andrew?
I'd like to see that happen. I don't think it's going to happen in my time, but we'd certainly like to make a progress towards it.
I think, sometimes we're so used to having things move slow, we can't imagine that they could move fast. And things can happen quickly. And to your point, government is slow. Business is usually leading what government is doing. And business ideas come because they see something that citizens are already doing and they want to monetize it. So in fact, citizens and the community activists and those, we are always leading the change we want to see, whether it's not, depolluting the river and helping to revitalize it, whether it's advocating for personal rights, for Aboriginals and growing, their community, whether it's going, okay, this extreme is not, we're always the first. So to think that actually government is doing it first, they are always behind. But to think that they can't do it fast, I think is a misconception. Because when the community advocates for it, we're no longer the silent majority. We are a coalition that, is strong. And to every politician who always goes, well, do you have community support? I always say something my mom used to tell me growing up. If 100% of people like you, you're a hypocrite. So just lose it, right? Once you get to a certain amount of support, pat yourself on the back, because if everyone likes you, you're doing something wrong, and so getting that across the line, and with the 29 lovely people we have in groups we have in the room, well, that is really strong community support, because it's been vocalized. And that citizen support then becomes a business idea, and then to the government support, and then they start moving faster, and you go, great, we've made the first step, now let's make the next one, and the next one, right? We crawl before we walk, then we run.
It's funny because giving a river rights seems a bit odd, but yet we do that with companies and have since, I think, the 80s. And one wonders if that's just so that the people running them can obfuscate their responsibilities onto a fictitious thing that's basically a human construct. But a river's not a construct, it's a thing that exists. And it would actually, when you think about it deeply enough, not that deeply, it soon becomes apparent that it would make more sense to give a river individual rights than it does a company. And it would probably benefit people much more. But,
Well, giving something a right gives it makes it part of the accountability.
Yeah. So you have to be accountability as you would to a person, that's based. And so there's one in New Zealand. I'm not going to try and pronounce the name, but that has legal rights as a person. And yes, we should be doing it. Yarra River has an act now, but it's not a legal person. That came up in 2017.
Can I jump in?
Yep.
Not right, but name. Cooks River.
Gulayari.
How do you say it?
Gulayari, I believe.
Yeah. Is that the way you say it?
That's the way you say Gulayari?
Yeah.
I'm cautious about using that to name the river because I've heard disparate views about whether it is the name of the river or it is the name of pelican dreaming or whether it's describing something else. So I'm cautious about using it, but I'm also as enthusiastic as everyone to have another name for the river besides Cooks.
And I mean, name is a name, it's nothing, but it is. Those things you were talking about, this connection with environment and country, that's in the name, and we can see it with Ayers Rock becoming Uluru, my God, it's a very big difference, and it's symbolic, the symbolism is important.
It's a value. It's a name that has value, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think any of the things we've spoken about are mutually exclusive, because I think we need to make the whole catchment more walkable. We need to depave the concrete canal anywhere it still exists and make it easier for storm water to enter into the catchment. We need to be catching more rainwater personally as individuals, houses, commercially. I think all of those things are great. I also think we can raise our collective ambition at the same time as doing that. And then ask ourselves, well, what's the highest ambition or hope that we could possibly have for this catchment? And then that way we have this kind of North Star or Southern Cross or whatever it is to really kind of articulate what that highest collective ambition is. And I want to also just surface what's been happening in Melbourne. There's Regen Melbourne's a similar group to Regen Sydney. They've been working on projects funded for a few years now. And just today, this thing is kind of growing at this huge speed. Their program of work called the Swimmable Birrarung. And so they're convening a similar group like this across diverse stakeholders. And just today they were on Sunrise in the morning talking about this project. And so I think the value of raising our collective ambition is really important. And then what's more than that? Why can't we drink this water? You know, like, what is our highest collective ambition? What would that mean? Because something like that obviously isn't just for humans, but it actually goes to so many layers of our kind of structural issues that are actually polluting the water for all our non-human kin as well. And I suppose the last thing I'd just say about that is just to come back to this idea of how we're intertwined, human health and river health, which is what we're here to talk about, and just to kind of bring that back to the fore.
Yeah. Yep, that's so true. And it's in her poem, Ying Chin ponders deeply that you should return your catch and you should not eat.
It's a very person-centric. So the first thing I did when we were discussing doing this, I went to Google and Google Scholar and did river health and human health to see what popped up. And one of the articles that popped up at the top at Google Scholar was talking about the fact that we speak about river health as a human-centric ecology. Right? And we've all described it. We want to give it person rights and it's non-human, but actually we are just one species on the Earth ecosystem, right? And so in it, it was describing, you know, we have applied all of these human ecological systems and the way we think of health to the river, right? Even though it's actually part of this bigger Earth ecosystem of which we are just a really small part of. And yes, it's how we're interpreting the understanding, but actually to go, well, it's non-human, it's like anything that's not human isn't cool, right? And so actually, do you think, you know, the words matter. And when you flip them and you change them and you apply that to other things, you know, it makes you think a bit differently that actually, is that just a way of our understanding it, or is it our way of putting it in its place, as your point, it's not on the board, that it's always second class, right? Because we've assigned it that name. And names have value, as you pointed out.
Names have value, yep. I guess that's why we're in this era, the Anthropocene, the age of humans, the centre of everything. But the river is water, and water is really interesting to think about. You know, I think the only two things we can rely on with water is that we can't start it and we can't stop it. It just comes when it wants. And it stops when it wants.
Makes up 70% of us.
Yeah.
It does. It does. It rains, it doesn't rain, it flows through us. We feel parched, we feel moist, we feel nourished as the water flows. I think, shifting out of the Anthropocene, out of the anthropocentric mindset is really what's at the heart of what we've been talking about. I think we've been talking a lot, and everyone's here and nodding, and there's the ripples of expressions. It's honestly, it's the best thing sitting here to see the ripples that go through the audience. But I think we might just take some time to take some questions, some comments, some observations from beautiful people
Don't
here.
be shy, y'all. I gave you Post-it notes to write them down.
Can we just ask a question?
Yeah.
What would it take to have a new name for the river?
Yes.
Juicy one.
That's a yeah.
The current river name. Nobody really. So
The Geographic Names Board. No, the Geographic Names Board owns that name. There has been research to determine another name for the river.
Jenny, this is actually a question, but it's sort of like one of the things that strikes me about the Cooks River, because it was probably the first river that was developed at colonisation and has suffered along with the rest of Australia thanks to colonisation. One of the challenges facing it is the loss of knowledge because of the sheer disruption and brutality of what was done to Aboriginal culture in this area, and also the dislocation. So it's really hard to identify, and there is, if my understanding is correct, there's also that different groups had different names for different parts, that there was never a singular name. So it's quite challenging for those reasons. So the idea of finding a name for the river, was that your question? Yeah. Is fraught because of the disruption and the suffering that led to where we are now. So it's a very fraught question. So I don't know. What do you think, Jennifer? I mean, I know it's really hard, but where would we start?
Where would we start? We'll start with stories, because there are stories that people tell, that people remember, that people pass on. We'd start, whether you start at Lapa or whether you start up at Chilora, you start and you gather all of those stories. In my own experience, what I've seen and heard is that there are many names that are remembered and nurtured and carried on through generations for places along the river, particular places where the eels go, or where the pelicans go, or the bend in the river where it gets deep. There are names for particular places, but not one name for the whole flow. And that's my experience with other rivers as well. So it might be that there's not one name, but there's a series of names. And when I think about how that system works, it shifts us into a different way of thinking and relating to the river, because it's about going to the particular place in the river at the right time, for your purpose, for the season, and rather than thinking about one geographic feature. And it also reminds us that the river, my dad was always telling us when we're out home, stick your finger in the river. It's a different river to last week, because it's some different water, and whether it's muddier, it's clearer, it's more fish, there's less fish, it's deeper, it's shallower. So putting your finger in the river is always putting your finger in a different river. So perhaps we might have to resolve ourselves to the fact that there's not one name, but there's a string of names that we can learn, and we can pick them up as we learn seasons and uses. And
do you think one possible solution might be a name that is fresh, that represents the community as it is now? And when I say community, I mean everybody. Would it need to be something that has if you were going to do it, would it need to be something that's not based in the past?
my own feeling about that, Andrew, would be that would be just, it'd be like calling it the Cooks River, to call it something new river. It's sticking another name on it.
Well, the Cooks has some unfortunate connotations being researched.
It has some unfortunate connotations, but I also think a bit carefully about this as well, because it's having that name Cooks River for that flow it's a cultural and a historic artefact. You know,
That's a good point.
James Cook was a person.
Yep.
Yeah. Here's a real person. He did some real things, and he's part of the story of country here. He's woven into the story of country. So I understand that to come from a culture that tends to name places and rivers and everything after humans. Comes from an anthropocentric culture. So that's part of the colonial story as well. Yeah.
So you're from Wiradjuri country, right? And so with the Macquarie River, they came up with the Womble, right? Were you aware of how they did that? Because that's also a massive system, right? Lots of different names along blah blah blah.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's come through Wurrijdal sitting around tables talking about this for a long time. What are we going to do? The desire for a single name is coming out of this moment in time where we are. So that's come from an agreement amongst Wiradjuri who look after that southern bank, the southwestern bank of the Macquarie River, and that's how that happened.
So that process might inform.
I've known him for a long time. It's
Yeah.
done in my head.
That's what I'm thinking too, it's about combination, because it's about going from one place to another. It's recognising that this is the river of many peoples. You know, so it's almost like the Darra, Wongal, Wurrijdal River. You know, like it's going from there to there sort of thing, you know. I mean, that would be more on key, because it's not just Wiradjuri. Well, on key.
Of colonialism that versus 200.
Jasmine, did you have a question?
Hello. I'm from a neighbouring river. So I'm from I work for the Parramatta River. And I think the issue around name is complicated, and I think that it means that there's stories that relate to the way in which scientists look at things, so that we look at estuaries, we look at creeks, we look at wetlands, so it means that we can kind of rethink and reconceptualize what a river is, because people just see like a blue line, and sort of, and I'm fond of telling people that there used to be wetlands from Parramatta Road to the river, so that would cut out a huge swathe of very expensive real estate. And so, it's in, and then there's been hills in there. So, and then when I say that, people start to look at their space differently, and that's also so here. And I was just interested in the discussion around human-centered direction. So the Parramatta River, I used to work for the Cooks River Alliance, and when Parramatta River said that there were going to be swimmable, Cooks River went into complete panic. No, our engineers said, no, we're not going to. But it's both of them are. It's like it's visionary, and it's quite amazing. In Canada, there's a group called Swim, Drink, Fish, which is restoring lakes and waterways. And part of the reason I do what I do was when I was a child, we could not fish in Lake Erie because the Americans and Canadians mercury into out of industrial places. It was a dead lake. It's a huge lake.
Yeah.
It was dead. And so it's about transformation, having a vision, and being united. What you say here. So all strength to you.
Yeah, look, the technology exists to do those things, even with the cooks. There's just the will to do it, really, and the imagination. That's all.
So we're talking about this river health and human health. So the sheet on Cooks River, I scratched out river. Anywhere there was river or drain, and I put street and bush care. And so actually the streets connect to
Yeah.
the river. What we do
They
when
are the
we
river.
walk, it's the downstream, right? So pick up any rubbish around the street before it gets washed in. Swipe this up before it goes down the drain. Pick up after pets so it doesn't end up in the street, right? So like what we do when we're walking in the street has that downstream, because as she pointed out earlier, everything washes away. So when we're talking about active transport and walking and biking and, making a better street, it's really about supporting that bigger ecosystem of your donut, right? That what we do, right? We don't shit where we eat. I told you I'd get it in. Right, we don't shit where we eat. So, why would we do that in our local area or in our city, right? Because that's just giving it to someone else, right? And so it does for me a lot, we think of transport. Well, and we hear transport, but actually that means walking to planes, like moving from one, crossing these song lines, like humans have exploded and enabled colonialism because we figured out how to move faster, quicker to farther places, right? It's how we've learned how to go to the moon. It's how we've learned other places. So on a day-to-day, we walk or we bike or, we drive like to help us in our local places. And so those things matter. The way we get around actually pollutes everything else around us, and there are those micro movements of what we need to do on a daily basis and then what we need to do on occasion. And when we're using, a really insufficient tool, right? You can make efficiency of a car more efficient, but that doesn't mean it's a sufficient tool for the problem that you're having, for the thing you're trying to achieve. And so I think we actually, when you're talking about human-centered design or place-centered design or whatever new name we come up with that's, the flavor of the month, it's really about, going back to, well, when I step here or when my dog is pooping and I don't pick it up, where is that going? Who is cleaning that up? Because it doesn't go away. It just becomes someone else's problem. So in the US, I grew up a lot of places, but I'm at the bottom of Louisiana, where the Mississippi, where all the river flows down to, and we have places called Cancer Rally, and all of these other things, where we get the shit funnels down to us. And, it goes somewhere else. And those people become impacted, and you are actually impacted because they have less than, or they are there. And so actually, when we think about our streets, the streets are the one thing that is entirely public, right? Government kind of owns it. It isn't, businesses don't own streets. Individuals don't own streets. Just like the river, no one person owns it. Like if we don't do it together, it doesn't get done. So when we think about that human-centered design, well, it's an everyone-centered design, an earth-centered design, because no one person owns that, no one entity owns that. And if we don't do it collectively, it doesn't get done.
That was beautifully said. If I could just add one thing to that, and I think it's around the out of sight, out of mind mentality that actually all of the kind of structures that have impacted us. So we walk down the street having no idea in the ways in which we're connected to the river. And I suppose it's just, I just want to highlight the way that our behaviours, the infrastructures and the worldviews are very much linked. And I don't know which one comes first. I think they co-emerge. So I think when we're talking about moving from an anthropocentric to a earth-centered view of the world, I think if we were to be of the river rather than be the Cook's River, owned by the person, whereas if we were to see ourselves as people of the Cook's catchment, and that's our kind of worldview as we walk around the street, what are our behaviours, or what does the street look like in order to facilitate that shift?
It's a big shift. It's a great shift, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, just on that point, Does the Regen Sydney, I'm interested, we have these planning controls that control our activities in the catchment, theoretically. The way we want to follow is what we do with stormwater. Does Regen Sydney, when they're looking at that planetary boundary, do you consider how you can infiltrate those like very bureaucratic systems, but do actually control the environment? How does Regen Sydney sit within that, or attempt to sit within that, or is that not part of the discussion?
No, I think that's a really good question, and I think it comes down to scale. And I think the way that the donut was first created was around meeting local social needs and not crossing global ecological thresholds. And so that's based on the planetary boundaries from Rockstrom and Stefan and all of their cohort. And since then, there's been a lot of work around, well, how do you actually downscale this to be applicable? Amsterdam first looked at the donut downscaled at the city scale, and that was in 2017. They did this thing called the city portrait. And so they took each of those dimensions of the donut and found indicators that the city of Amsterdam already used, but arranged them in a way so that they had a dashboard across all of the social and ecological dimensions, and that was at the city scale. And so similarly, what we've done with the Sydney donut is to say, well, how can we reframe each of those dimensions? What are the dimensions that people value in Sydney through that research process? So now we have, that's a starting point. And then I think now what needs to happen actually is continue working at that city scale across catchments, but then also at the local scale in the commons, public-private partnership to say, how can we identify metrics or indicators for each of these, and where are their gaps? So we might need to create new ways of seeing how we're progressing.
Did the Amsterdam example apply that to planning controls? That's how I took your thing.
Planning controls and the way to manage country.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of planning controls that, they say minimum best practice or this. So that doesn't mean that you can't apply the donut to it. It's the social and cultural interpretation of that planning controls. They aren't actually, like even our transport ones, so rigid that other things can't be done. Actually, they can be done within those existing planning controls, but the person or that bureaucrat on the other side isn't applying them with a donut value. So the same thing walking, it's like, we could do that. It's at the top of our strategy. There is nothing in our planning or our designs that says we can't. And in fact, there is a whole lot of things that would allow us to do that. But that social and cultural value there. So most things are not a technical problem. They are a social problem. Our socio-technical transition is not a technical problem. We have the tools to do it. We have the tools to fix it. It is a social problem. And most of our planning controls, I'd be interested to see though if that Amsterdam one applied that, but they are flexible enough. They are not as rigid as we think. Now the people applying them are rigid.
It's funny, just when I started off, I thought I was going to do environmental science and that would be the answer. And then I slowly but surely drifted to social sciences and then finished there. But you're quite right, the technical solutions exist right now to do what we need to do. We're just not using them. It really is. And what you mentioned before, the story, the narrative is so fundamentally important because that shifts your epistemology of what you think is real and what you think is unquestionable, and asks the question, is that really the case? And it doesn't have to be that way. So the social side of it is far more, I don't know if important is the right word, but it's far more critical right now than the technical, because the technical solutions exist.
Just to really quickly just add, so I'm not sure about the planning controls, but it ended up with the City of Amsterdam. It was, I suppose, a guiding strategy. But in terms of actual implementation, they had tariffs and taxes on goods imported, and I suppose also measures when it came to farmland. So what the way that different produce was encouraged in different parts of the city. So, yeah, but I will look into the planning controls. I'd like to know that.
Yep. Yep. Soraya and Peter had, Peter?
I think it's important to look at scale. The Cooks River's hundreds of square kilometres in size, in catchment, and I think it is really important to go below that and start looking at sub-catchments. And I think I can't admire Marrickville Council years ago, and they worked with, we were lucky to be part of a program they ran, identifying sub-catchments in that municipality, empowering people in that sub-catchments to start to understand what the sub-catchment was and where it fitted into the catchment, what the relationship was of the sub-catchment was to the river and to the local topography. And then that group of people that we were lucky enough to be part of worked with the local primary school and ran a program over it. The school eventually wrote a program that they covered for the whole year. And it was called We're All Cooks River People. We took kids on tours of the river, but we took them through the catchment. And you start looking at the catchment, the sub-catchment, in terms of where the curves are, where it fits. We stenciled all the drains, saying this drain connects to the Cooks River. And then what happened? Amalgamation of the councils, whole thing's gone. The sub-catchment area is where people can understand the local topography. The catchment is much too big. The river's too big. You know, we don't go up to the Enfield.
Yeah.
Our part of the river's here. And I know every groove and every line that runs down to the river where I live, and I think that's really important to start at that sub-catchment level to give people a feeling for that, and we're part of a bigger thing, and we're part of that river, and everything we do here affects the bigger catchment and affects the river.
And also, so one of the great things about that project that Megan did was it connected very, very multicultural communities with their sense of their own rivers and their own places, and then their connection with the Cooks River. That was just brought so many different perspectives on rivers locally down to the sub-catchment.
A lot of people in that original program didn't know the river was there.
Yeah, that's a design issue as well, because we design our cities to be so inhuman or so unreflective of reality that they actually make it difficult for people to see what's really there. It's really interesting, actually.
Yeah. Whoever invented the fence, we need to go back in history and
sort them out.
I know, right?
Years. There's a question there. Is there another question up the back?
I was just going to comment on the previous comment before about solutions existing, that perhaps the social will's not there or whatever else. But actually, I think it really does. I was going to say this before your comment, actually, then I wasn't going to say it, but it's definitely about the will of our councils, and particularly with amalgamations. Yes, but say for I live in Ashbury, and we're right on the very edge of Canterbury Bankstown, and they couldn't care less like it's in Ashbury. You know what I mean? So, it's what the people want and what decision makers do and want. There's a real disconnect.
Yeah.
Can I just say something about that real quick? I also just want to highlight how little money local councils have. I mean, I totally agree with your point. But definitely with state and federal, who definitely have people channeling up their voices, they just have no mechanisms for accountability. So even when you do have community engagement strategies, or God forbid a citizens' assembly, if that ever happens, they could just look at the letter of, suggestions or demands and then throw it in the bin. So there's no accountability there. So I think, there's...
There is a little bit. So for example, when you are vocal to your local government, they do have the ear of the state. And if they aren't telling the state, my community wants this, they're not hearing it. Like with transport, they're not hearing my community wants biking. They're going, my community wants parking. So your local government is the easiest way to get your voice heard, but your expectation of what you're asking them to do needs to change. So we talk about this at Better Streets. You want to make them a friend and an ally so they know your problems, because they will advocate to state government for that, who has the power to change things. But if you're railing against the local government going, give us more money and do this, well, they don't have that, and they're going to get defensive because, let's face it, who likes to be yelled at? None of us, right?
No.
But if you go and go, let me help you so we can go target the real bad guy, the state over there, you find an ally to amplify, and then it does work, because then those local councillors are filtering through their state counterparts, whether we're on the different committees, are going, no, our community is saying this. And that is where the impact goes. So what you're asking your council to do needs to change. You are an ally in the fight with them to go get those things that aren't in their power. So I think it's about changing that relationship with them. One from antagonistic to going, actually, you're a neighbor. You are an ally. You are a potential supporter. Now let's build a big army and go gang up on someone else.
I just wanted to pick up the point about stenciling and what a lovely project that is, because you're getting the engagement, you're getting the storytelling, you're raising awareness. And a really nice streets example of that is in Melbourne, in the lanes around Holland Street, that they've stenciled people on the road to slow the traffic down, and they're construction workers with helmets, they're tourists with cameras, they're children with grandparents with walking sticks and their wheelchairs, and so they're real people, real stories. And so if you speed in those streets, you're having an impact on these people in our community. And I just think there's a real art, isn't there, about making your issue or your cause relatable to people who are using the space, using the river, polluting the river potentially. But I thought there was a nice connection between our different campaigns and causes, and being really good with that visual storytelling.
I'd love to see a visual of all the different names and meanings of First Nations connections through the length of the river. I mean, if that doesn't already exist somewhere, that would be fantastic.
Maybe if you pick the first letter out of each, it'll spell a nice new name.
There's conversations about this. There was someone up the back. Yeah. Yeah.
From your perspective, what's the importance of maintaining the river's health? So, from your perspective, what's the importance of maintaining the river's health?
In a nutshell, if the river's healthy, I can be healthy. And that's in a nutshell. The importance of maintaining the river's health for me is that if I do what I can to keep the river, the trees, the birds, the insects, if I do what I can to help the river be healthy, then I'll feel good about myself and I'll benefit from the health of the river. But the river it's a barometer, it's a compass, and it reminds me about whether I'm being a good human part of the system.
Jennifer, there's been a lot of research done recently in the last few decades, like I said before, on that, and one of the more there's very strong correlations between healthy natural environments in urban areas and human health. It's indisputable, physical, mental health. But also, there's more recent research is suggesting that there is a strong correlation. You can actually use green space as a predictor of crime. Less blue green space, less healthy rivers, and Los Angeles is a wonderful example. It's completely cemented and it has high crime rates. So you can actually demonstrate scientifically now that you can predict crime based on the degree to which urban rivers are healthy and the surrounding blue-green space as well. And the worse it is, the worse the crime.
So that's it could be some confounding factors of that, like.
Oh, there could be. There could be.
Or live in areas which have actually been able to lobby for decent green blue space, and there's a whole lot of other stuff. But anyway, I agree with the point. But
that's why I said it's this recent research it's not there are confounding factors, but it's starting to show that there is. But equally, it could be the social, what do they call it, the psychological impacts of living in a highly urbanised area can actually have damaging effects on people's psychology and their behaviour accordingly. So the science isn't in on that yet, but it certainly hasn't excluded it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I live used to live in Western Sydney, and I think a lot of it has got to, and Western Sydney's got some fantastic open spaces, and Blacktown, like really beautiful, huge, rigid whole, everything. But I think the issue is the time people spend in the bush, on the river, etc.
Yeah, on the river. Yep.
And we're talking here about levels of connection. We're saying there's the land, there's the environment, and then the social, and then we talked about the political on top of that. The fact that our political divisions are not based on country and catchment. They're based on some sort of arbitrary, this is my street, you're on that side of the street, on that side of the street, it's got nothing to do with anything actually. And then the other level is of course the economic. And it's the economic that is getting in the way of people actually spending time on country. Yeah. Because we're either not living, we have to travel somewhere to go to work, and by the time we get up it's dark. Or people just not in the space where they're actually enjoying the space.
It's actually a really interesting point. We haven't got much time. How much time have we got left?
-3 minutes.
-3 minutes. Really quickly, it's worth pointing out, because you sort of touched on it, there is a strong correlation between, we talk about inequities in terms of people, how much you get paid, but there's also inequities in terms of access to naturalised areas that mirror each other almost perfectly. So it's another form, an expression of economic inequities.
Can I just add one more correlation on top of what you just said about the arbitrary political boundaries that kind of make our everyday lives? If you have a look at the bioregions across the Australian continent, there's 89 bioregions, and there's a remarkable similarity between the Aboriginal language groups and the bioregions.
So I think the question about the benefit of caring for the river is really the good question to carry away with us, to see the benefits that we can accrue. Small benefits, if the river's well and healthy, we can be well and healthy. Kookaburras will sing to us in the morning. You notice they've been up before the sun lately? And the butcher birds will sing, and the magpies will warble, and all of, the dragonflies will be around. When the river is well, all of our non-human neighbours are well, and we're well as a result of that. So it's been great to spend time this evening talking about this really important part of our own health and our belonging to country. We're all Cooks River people caring for country.